The stagecoach door opened, and Holt Brennan's future stepped down in a body the frontier had taught him to judge. She handed him a slate instead of speaking. That silence would teach him more about worth than a lifetime of words ever could. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more incredible stories tomorrow. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let's continue with the story. Wyoming dust drifted and settled around Holt Brennan's boots as the stagecoach rolled toward him. 3 years of silence had hollowed out his life, 3 years in a house that still carried the scent of smoke and grief. 3 years of meals that filled his stomach but tasted like ash. The letter in his pocket promised practicality. A woman who could work. A woman who wouldn't expect tenderness he no longer had to give. He'd made himself clear in every line he wrote. No romance, no dreams, no promises beyond shared labor and staying alive. The driver pulled the horses to a stop and looked Holt over with an expression hovering between curiosity and pity. The burn scars that mapped Holt's face always earned that look. He'd stopped noticing 2 years ago. "Brennan!" the driver called. Holt nodded once. The driver climbed down and opened the passenger door. A woman's hand appeared first, gripping the frame. Then she stepped down, and Holt felt something in his chest draw painfully tight. She was large. Her body filled the doorway so completely that the driver instinctively stepped back. Her dress was plain but clean, her dark hair pulled back with strict precision. She descended carefully, each movement measured, as though she expected the earth itself to refuse her weight. Their eyes met. Hers were grey, sharp, observant, intelligent. There was something else there, too. Fear, perhaps, or defiance sharpened by long experience. Holt opened his mouth, searching for words that might soften the moment. Before he could speak, she reached into her bag and pulled out a slate board and a piece of chalk. Her hand moved quickly, decisively, neat letters forming without hesitation. She turned the slate toward him. "I am Ada Thornwell. You expected someone different." It wasn't a question. The driver snorted. "Well, this is something. You sure you want delivery, Brennan?" The words hit Holt like a fist. He watched Ada's shoulders tense, watched her fingers tighten on the slate. She didn't look away from him, didn't lower her eyes in shame or apology. She just waited, chin lifted slightly, for him to confirm what she'd probably heard her entire life, that she wasn't wanted, that she was a mistake. Holt thought of the letters. Her handwriting, careful and clear. Her words about growing vegetables, mending fences, keeping a house. Never a mention of her appearance, never a mention of her voice. He thought of his own letters. Never a mention of his scars. Never a mention of the nightmares that still woke him screaming. "I'm sure," Holt said, his voice rough from disuse. He stepped forward and took Ada's traveling bag from the driver. "Welcome to Wyoming, Mrs. Brennan." Ada's eyes widened slightly. She wrote again on the slate. "You don't seem pleased." "Neither do you," Holt replied. "But we made an arrangement. I keep my word." The driver muttered something under his breath and climbed back onto the stagecoach. Within moments, he was gone, leaving them in a cloud of dust and unspoken questions. Ada wrote again. "The house is far?" 40 miles. We'll reach it by dark if we leave now." She nodded and moved toward his wagon without hesitation. Holt watched her climb up, noting the strength in her arms, the way she didn't wait for his help. She settled onto the bench and arranged her skirts, then looked at him expectantly. Holt climbed up beside her. The wagon dipped under their combined weight. He took up the reins, clicked his tongue, and they started moving. The silence between them felt heavier than the August heat. After an hour, Ada wrote on her slate and held it up. "Why did you choose a mail-order bride?" Holt kept his eyes on the horizon. Same reason you answered the advertisement, I expect. Ran out of other options. She erased the words with her sleeve and wrote again. Will you tell me how you got the scars? Will you tell me why you can't speak? Ada lowered the slate. They didn't exchange another word for the next 5 hours. The ranch house came into view as the sun bled into the western mountains. Ada studied it in the dying light. One story. Weather-worn boards, a porch sagging on one side. Behind it stood a barn that had endured more years than care. Beyond that, empty land stretched in every direction, broken only by fence posts and scattered cattle. Holt reined in the wagon. It's not much. Ada wrote on her slate. It's more than I had. He climbed down and offered his hand. She hesitated before taking it. Her palm was rough with calluses, her grip firm. The instant her boots touched the ground, she released him and walked toward the house on her own. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface. A table, 2 chairs, a cold stove. One bedroom door stood open, revealing an unmade bed. Ada moved slowly through the space. She traced a finger along the table, examined the stove, glanced into the bedroom. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the quiet. Holt lingered in the doorway, hat in hand. I'll sleep in the barn. Ada turned sharply and shook her head. She wrote fast. That's foolish. You'll freeze when winter comes. There's only one bed. Then build another. She erased and wrote again. Or I'll build it myself. A crack of thunder made them both look toward the door. The sky had darkened impossibly fast, clouds rolling in like smoke. Wind hit the house hard enough to rattle the windows. Storm's coming early, Holt said, moving to close the shutters. Bad one, by the look of it. Ada was already moving, securing the other windows without being asked. She worked quickly, efficiently. When lightning flashed, illuminating her face, Holt saw no panic there, only focus. The rain started as a whisper, then became a roar. Within minutes, water hammered the roof like fists. Holt lit a lamp while Ada examined the ceiling. She pointed to a dark stain spreading in the corner. Leak, Holt said. I meant to fix it. Ada found a bucket without being told where to look, positioned it under the drip. She wrote on her slate. What else needs fixing? Everything. She studied him for a long moment, then wrote again. Good. I prefer useful to idle. Wind tore at the house. Something crashed outside, probably the chicken coop door. Holt cursed and moved toward the entrance. Ada grabbed his arm, shaking her head. She pointed at the window where lightning revealed horizontal rain and flying debris. I need to secure it, Holt said. Ada picked up a coil of rope near the door and handed it to him. Then she grabbed a second rope and wrapped one end around her own waist. She held up the slate. Tie us together. If you go out there alone, you'll blow away or get struck. I anchor you, you fix the door. We both live. Holt stared at her. You just got here. And I didn't come all this way to watch you die being stubborn. She thrust the rope toward him again. He took it. Their hands brushed as he tied the rope around his waist, then secured the other end around hers. The knot settled between them like a promise neither had intended to make. Stay close, he said. Ada nodded. She braced herself against the doorframe as Holt opened it. The wind tried to rip the door from his hands. Rain slashed at his face. Ada's weight behind him kept him grounded as he pushed into the storm. They fought their way to the barn together. The chicken coop door banged violently against its frame. Holt secured it while Ada held the rope taut. Her body angled against the wind. Lightning struck close enough to feel the air crack. Thunder followed instantly. When they finally stumbled back inside the house, both soaked and gasping, Holt realized something had shifted. This woman he'd known for less than a day had just risked her life to keep him safe. Ada wrung water from her hair and wrote on the slate with shaking hands. Your barn needs new hinges. Despite everything, Holt almost smiled. I'll add it to the list. Dawn arrived cold and clear. Holt woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, strong and unmistakable. He hadn't tasted it in months, surviving instead on weak chicory. In the kitchen, Ada stood at the stove, already dressed. Eggs hissed in the pan. She'd found his hidden stores, the good flour, the salt pork wrapped carefully in cloth. The table was set with proper plates instead of meals eaten straight from the skillet. She noticed him watching and pointed firmly at the chair. Holt sat. She placed a full plate before him, then took her own seat across the table. He ate in silence, watching the precision of her movements. When he finished, she slid the slate toward him. The garden is dying. The fence near the creek is down. Your cattle are scattered. Which do we fix first? Holt set down his fork. We? Ada's eyes narrowed. She wrote quickly. You expected decoration? I expected you'd need time. I've been adjusting my whole life. Show me the work. By mid-morning, Holt realized how wrong he'd been. Ada hauled fence posts with a strength that surprised him. She worked through the heat without complaint, never slowing, never asking for rest. You grew up on a farm, he said finally. She nodded and wrote between hammer strikes. Pennsylvania, dairy cows. Why'd you leave? Her hands stilled. She set the hammer down and wrote slowly. When I was 8, my father's business partner tried to make me lie about stolen money. When I refused, he put his hands around my throat until something inside me broke. The doctors said I'd never speak again. Holt felt something twist in his chest. Your father. Believed his partner, said I was clumsy, had fallen. The man was his friend since childhood. She erased and continued. I became invisible after that. Too big, too silent, too much trouble. When my mother died last year, my father made it clear I was a burden he could no longer afford. She picked up the hammer and drove another nail home with 3 solid strikes. Holt cleared his throat. The scars. You asked yesterday. Ada looked at him, waiting. Fire. 3 years ago. My wife Emma and our daughter were inside. I got them out, but Emma ran back for something, a music box her mother gave her. The roof collapsed. He paused. I tried to follow. The burns kept me out. I heard them screaming until I didn't. Ada set down the hammer. She picked up her slate but didn't write. Instead, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand on his scarred forearm. Just for a moment. Then she returned to work. They finished the fence line by sunset. Holt's respect for her had grown with each post sunk into the hard ground. She never complained, never slowed, never acted like the work was beneath her. That evening, as they walked back toward the house, Holt noticed Ada favoring her right leg slightly. You're hurt. She shook her head and wrote, Old injury. My father's partner kicked me down the stairs after he strangled me. My hip never healed right. You should have said something. Why? Would the fence have fixed itself? She erased and wrote again. I've carried worse pain than this. Inside, Ada prepared supper, while Holt tried not to watch her move around his kitchen like she belonged there. She set plates down, then wrote on her slate and placed it between them. You loved your wife very much. It wasn't a question, but Holt answered anyway. Yes. Do you still? Holt looked at the slate, at Ada's grey eyes watching him steadily. I loved who we were together. That person died in the fire with her. Ada wrote again. Then we're both ghosts learning to haunt the same house. For the first time since Emma's death, Holt felt something other than numbness. He couldn't name it yet, but it was there, small and fragile as a candle flame in a dark room. Outside, the cattle lowed in the distance. Inside, Two broken people shared a meal in comfortable silence, bound by nothing but honesty and a contract written on paper. It was more than either had expected to find. 3 weeks passed quietly, like water finding its natural level. Ada changed the house from a place Holt merely survived into one that almost felt lived in. Curtains appeared, sewn from fabric she'd brought in her trunk. The dying garden showed fresh green shoots. Meals became something Holt looked forward to instead of enduring. That night, she served stew made with vegetables from town and the last of the salt pork. Holt watched her move through the kitchen, confident and sure. She'd reorganized the shelves, learned his habits, imposed order where there had been none. They ate. The slate waited between them. "You're a good cook," Holt said. Ada wrote, "My mother taught me. She said a woman who could feed people well would never be completely unwanted." Was she right? Her hand paused. Then, no. But it's useful anyway. Holt poured more coffee. Night pressed in against the windows. "You never mentioned siblings." Ada's expression shifted. "I have a sister, Rose. She's 16. "That why you answered my letter?" She wrote faster now. "After our mother died, my father's debts came due. Rose is beautiful. Everything I'm not. A man named Cyrus Dutch offered to clear the debts if my father gave him Rose in marriage. He's 53. Cruel." Holt's jaw hardened. "Your father agreed?" "He had until September. I left in July. My plan was to establish myself here, save money, send for Rose before the deadline." She turned the slate around, her eyes meeting his. "I have 2 months left." "How much do you need?" Ada wrote the amount. Holt's breath caught. It was more than he made in half a year of good cattle sales. "That's not possible," he said quietly. Ada's hand trembled as she erased. When she wrote again, the letters were uneven. "I know, but I had to try. Rose doesn't know I'm attempting this. I didn't want to give her hope I couldn't fulfill." Holt stood and paced to the window. His reflection stared back at him, scarred and weathered. Behind it, Ada sat perfectly still, waiting for him to confirm what she already knew, that her sister was lost. He thought of Emma and their daughter, how he'd failed to save them, how that failure had hollowed him out and left him moving through days like a man already dead. "There might be a way," he heard himself say. Ada's chair scraped as she stood. She grabbed the slate and wrote frantically. "How?" "Wild mustangs. There's a herd in the canyon, maybe 40 strong. If we could catch and break them, sell them to the army post, we'd have enough." He turned to face her. "But it's dangerous work. Men die doing it." Ada wrote without hesitation. "Then we start tomorrow." "You don't understand. Breaking horses isn't like mending fences. I understand my sister will be given to a monster if I do nothing." She erased and wrote larger. "I understand that doing nothing is the same as killing her myself." Holt saw the determination in her grey eyes, the set of her jaw. He recognized it because he'd seen it in the mirror 3 years ago, right before he'd run into a burning house. "We'll need supplies. Rope, a breaking pen, feed." Ada was already writing a list. Her chalk flew across the slate, each item appearing in neat script. When she finished, she held it up. "Tomorrow we gather supplies. The day after, we hunt horses." Holt took the slate from her hands and set it on the table. "This could kill us both." Ada picked up the chalk and wrote one more line. "Some things are worth dying for." She left the kitchen and disappeared into her room. Holt stood alone, staring at the words on the slate. In the lamplight, they seemed to glow with their own fierce light. They were working the breaking pen when the riders appeared, 3 men on exhausted horses, dust-caked and hard-eyed. Holt saw them from across the corral and felt his gut tighten. "Ada," he called. "Go to the house." She looked up, took in the riders, and shook her head. She stepped to his side instead, wiping her hands on her work dress. The lead rider dismounted, broad-shouldered, a scar slashing from eye to jaw. His grin made Holt's fists curl. "Well now," the man said. "Didn't expect entertainment this far out." "You're on private land," Holt replied evenly. "State your business or move on." The man's gaze flicked from Holt's scars to Ada. "We've been riding hard. Need food. Need rest. There's a town 20 miles east. That's a long ride." He stepped closer. His companions spread out, too casually. "And you seem well-stocked. Big woman like that probably eats enough for 5. Ada's hand closed around Holt's arm. One sharp squeeze. A warning. "I'll give you jerky and water," Holt said. "Then you leave." The man's grin widened. His eyes dragged over Ada. "What if we want more than jerky?" He laughed softly. "What if we want to know how a scarred-up wreck like you ended up with a woman at all? Even a fat mute?" Holt moved before he thought. His fist connected with the man's jaw, snapping his head back. The other 2 rushed forward. Holt caught one with an elbow, felt bone crack. The 3rd man grabbed him from behind. Ada moved like lightning. She swung the cast-iron skillet she'd been heating for dinner, connecting with the 3rd man's skull. He dropped like a stone. The scarred leader recovered, pulling a knife. "You just made a mistake, friend." He lunged. Holt sidestepped, but the blade caught his ribs, opening a line of fire across his side. Ada swung the skillet again, this time at the man's knife hand. Metal rang against metal. The knife flew into the dirt. Holt tackled the man, driving him into the ground. They grappled in the dust, trading blows. Blood filled Holt's mouth. The world tilted and spun. Then Ada was there, bringing a fence post down on the man's shoulder. He howled and rolled away. "Get out!" Holt rasped, climbing to his feet. Blood soaked his shirt. "Get out or the next one dies." The scarred man looked at his unconscious companion, at his friend with the broken nose, at Ada standing ready with the fence post. He spat blood and backed toward his horse. "This ain't over." "It is," Holt said. "You come back. I shoot first." The men mounted and rode off, 2 of them helping the 3rd stay upright. Holt watched until they disappeared, then his legs buckled. Ada caught him, her strength keeping him upright. She guided him toward the house, her breathing harsh in his ear. Inside, she eased him into a chair and tore open his shirt. The knife wound wasn't deep, but it bled freely. She worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging while Holt gritted his teeth against the pain. When she finished, she picked up her slate with shaking hands. "You could have died. So could you. I'm not worth dying for." Holt grabbed her wrist, stopping her from erasing. "Neither am I, but we did it anyway." That night, Holt dragged his bedroll outside Ada's door. When she emerged and saw him there, she wrote on her slate and held it up in the lamplight. "Thank you." Holt nodded. Through the thin walls he could hear her breathing, steady and alive. He stayed awake until dawn, listening to that sound, keeping watch over something he was only beginning to understand mattered more than his own survival. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a postal rider making his monthly rounds. Ada's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Holt watched from the doorway, his ribs still tender from the knife wound. She read standing up. Then her knees gave out. Holt caught her before she hit the floor, easing her into a chair. The letter fell from her fingers. He picked it up, recognizing the neat feminine script that wasn't Ada's. "Dear Ada, Father has moved the wedding forward. Mr. Dutch grows impatient. I am to marry him in 3 months, not 6. He came to the house yesterday and looked at me the way men look at horses they're considering buying. I am afraid. Please, if there is anything you can do, your loving sister, Rose. Ada's slate lay on the table. She grabbed it, her chalk scratching frantically. 3 months. I have 3 months. Holt calculated quickly. We have 8 horses broken. At $40 each, that's $320. We need 700 more. Ada wrote through tears that left wet spots on the slate. Impossible. Not impossible. Difficult. Holt pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The canyon herd. If we can take 20 more horses and break them fast, selling to the army fort instead of waiting for buyers to come through, we'll have enough. 20 horses in 3 months while running the ranch? I've done harder things. Ada wiped her eyes and wrote, You've nearly died twice since I arrived. Once in a fire you won't talk about, and once defending me from drifters. And you've saved me both times I've been injured here. Holt leaned forward. Your sister needs $700. I need to stop feeling like a dead man pretending to be alive. Maybe we can solve both problems together. Ada stared at him, her grey eyes searching his face. She wrote slowly. Why would you risk yourself for a girl you've never met? Holt looked at his scarred hands, thought of Emma and their daughter, the music box she'd died retrieving. Because I couldn't save the people I loved. Maybe I can save someone you love. Ada's chalk hovered over the slate. When she wrote again, her letters were barely legible. If you die doing this, I will never forgive you. Then we'd better not die. The next morning, they rode for the canyon before dawn. The Mustang herd grazed in the valley below, wild and wary. Holt counted 23 horses, mostly mares with a few young stallions. We'll need to separate them, he said. Take the younger ones first. They break easier. Ada nodded and touched his arm, pointing. A black stallion stood apart from the herd, watching them with intelligent eyes. Scars marked his flanks, evidence of past battles. That one's trouble, Holt said. Ada wrote on her slate. That one will bring the most money. She was right. A horse like that, properly trained, could fetch twice what a standard mount would bring. But breaking him might kill them both. We'll take him last, Holt decided. If we're still alive. They spent 12 hours that day building a temporary corral and cutting off escape routes. By sunset, they'd managed to drive 6 horses into the pen. The black stallion watched from a distance, then disappeared into the canyon shadows. Ada cooked over a fire while Holt checked the corral ropes. His body ached from riding and climbing. Tomorrow they'd start the real work, the dangerous work of breaking wild animals to saddle and bridle. Ada handed him food and sat close enough that their shoulders touched. She wrote on her slate by firelight. My sister's last letter said she dreams of mountains and open spaces. She's never seen anything but Philadelphia streets. She'll see mountains, Holt said. I promise you that. Ada leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment. Then she straightened and returned to her meal. But something had shifted between them. Some wall had cracked. In the darkness, with only firelight and stars, 2 broken people had become something more than a contract on paper. The black stallion fought like he knew his life depended on it. For 6 weeks, they'd worked from dawn until their hands bled, breaking horse after horse. They'd sold 19 to the army fort, each transaction bringing them closer to the impossible number they needed. But this horse, this final piece of their plan, refused to break. Holt circled the corral, rope in hand. The stallion's eyes followed him, calculating. Ada stood outside the fence, watching with her slate ready. They'd developed signals, a language beyond words. 1 tap meant danger, 2 meant wait, 3 meant run. The stallion charged. Holt dodged, felt the animal's heat as it thundered past. He'd been thrown 4 times already today. His shoulder screamed where he'd hit the ground. But they needed this horse. It would bring enough to cover what they were still short. "One more try," Holt called to Ada. She shook her head and held up her slate. "You're hurt. Tomorrow." "We don't have tomorrow. The wire transfer needs to go out in 5 days." Ada climbed the fence, dropping into the corral beside him. Holt started to protest, but she was already moving, slow and steady, approaching the stallion from an angle. The horse snorted, stamped, but didn't charge. She held out her hand, empty and open. The stallion's ears flicked forward. Ada took another step, then another. She was close enough to touch him now. The horse's muscles bunched, ready to bolt or fight. Ada began humming. Not words, because she had no words, but a low melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. The stallion's ears swiveled toward the sound. His breathing slowed. Holt watched, afraid to move, as Ada's hand connected with the horse's neck. She stroked once, twice. The stallion shuddered, but held still. She reached for the bridle hanging on the fence post. That's when everything went wrong. A snake, hidden in the corner of the corral, struck at the horse's leg. The stallion screamed and reared. His hooves came down like hammers, missing Ada by inches. Holt ran forward, trying to reach her. The horse spun, panicked and wild. One hoof caught Holt square in the chest, launching him backward into the fence. The world went black at the edges. Through the haze, Holt saw the stallion bearing down on him, eyes white with terror. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then Ada screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and broken and terrible. It wasn't a word. It wasn't anything close to normal speech, but it was sound, human sound, the first she'd made in 20 years. The stallion stopped. Just stopped, like he'd hit a wall. He stood trembling, looking at Ada with something like recognition. Ada's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The scream had cost her something, ripped something open that she'd kept sealed for 2 decades. Tears streamed down her face. Holt dragged himself upright, his ribs on fire. "Ada." She lowered her hand slowly. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but nothing came. The scream had been everything she had, torn from her by terror for his life. The stallion stood, perfectly still now, the fight gone out of him. Ada approached again, her hand shaking as she reached for the bridle. This time, the horse let her slip it on. She led him to Holt, pressed the rope into his hands. That night, back at the house, Holt found Ada on the porch steps. She held her slate but hadn't written anything. He sat beside her, his body aching from the day's violence. "You screamed for me," he said quietly. Ada picked up the chalk. Her hand hovered over the slate for a long moment. Then she wrote, "I thought you were going to die." "I wasn't worth that. Wasn't worth breaking your silence." Ada erased and wrote faster. "You don't get to decide your worth to me." Holt reached across the space between them and took her hand. Her fingers were calloused and strong, marked by weeks of brutal work. He didn't let go. "We did it," he said. "We have enough now." Ada squeezed his hand once, then stood and went inside. But she left the door open behind her, an invitation. Holt sat in the darkness, feeling the ghost of her touch on his palm, understanding that something between them had changed forever. They counted the money 3 times. Each time, they came up $60 short. Ada's chalk moved frantically across the slate. "We sold everything! How is it not enough?" Holt stared at the bills spread across the table. They'd worked themselves half to death for 3 months. Ada's hands were scarred from rope burns. His body was a map of bruises and breaks, and they were still short. The race, Holt said. Ada looked up sharply. She wrote, "No. The purse is $100. Winner takes all." "It's suicide. Those riders are professionals. You'll be killed." Holt stood and walked to the window. Outside, the black stallion grazed peacefully, transformed from the wild creature that had nearly killed him. "That horse is fast, faster than anything I've seen. We have a chance." Ada crossed the room and grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. She wrote with shaking hands, "I won't watch you die for my sister." "Then don't watch." Holt took the slate from her and set it down. "But I'm riding. The race is in 2 days. If I win, Rose gets her freedom. If I lose, at least I tried. And if you die, what then? I stay here alone, knowing you died for a debt that wasn't yours." Holt had no answer for that. The race started at dawn. 15 riders lined up, their horses stamping and snorting. Holt recognized some from town, hard men who rode like they'd been born in the saddle. The course ran 12 miles through canyon country, treacherous terrain even in daylight. Ada stood at the starting line, her slate clutched against her chest. She'd written something but hadn't shown him. The gun fired. The horses exploded forward in a wave of dust and thunder. Holt gave the stallion his head, feeling the animal's power beneath him. They took the first turn wide, avoiding the crush of bodies. A rider went down, trampled. The pack thinned. By mile 6, only 8 riders remained. Holt's lungs burned. Blood ran from where a branch had caught his cheek. The stallion pushed harder, pulling ahead of the pack. They could win this. They could actually win. The ravine appeared without warning. The lead rider tried to turn, failed, went over the edge screaming. Holt pulled hard on the reins. The stallion jumped, clearing the gap by inches. Behind him, 2 more horses went down. 5 riders left. 4 miles to go. The stallion stumbled on loose rock. Holt felt the animal's leg buckle, knew they were about to fall. He kicked free of the stirrups, hit the ground, rolling. Pain exploded through his left side. Something cracked. Ribs, maybe more. The stallion recovered and circled back. Holt dragged himself upright. Tasted blood. 3 riders thundered past. He had maybe 30 seconds before the last 2 caught up. He mounted through a haze of agony. The stallion ran, and Holt held on, vision tunneling. They passed 1 rider, then another. The finish line appeared through the dust. 2 horses ahead, 1 beside him. Holt leaned forward, urging the stallion on. The horse found something deeper, some final reserve. They pulled even with the leader. Then ahead. The finish line rushed toward them. They won by a length. Holt slid from the saddle and collapsed. Hands pulled at him, voices shouted. He saw Ada's face above his, her mouth moving, but he couldn't hear the words. Blood soaked his shirt. More than there should be. The ride back to the ranch existed only in fragments. Ada driving the wagon, the jolting making him scream. Darkness, then lamplight. Ada's hands tearing his shirt, revealing the damage. The wound in his side from the drifter's knife had torn open. The fall had made it worse. Fever took him that night. In the delirium, he talked. Later, Ada would tell him everything he said, but in the moment, he only knew her hands on his face, cool and gentle. "Ada," he whispered, "when did you stop being the woman I didn't want and become the one I can't lose?" She pressed a wet cloth to his forehead. He caught her wrist. "Your sighs, your silence. I stopped seeing them weeks ago. Now I only see you, your strength, your courage, the way you've never given up on anything. Not your sister, not me, not yourself." He drifted in and out. Ada stayed beside him through the night, changing bandages, forcing water past his lips, keeping him alive through sheer will. Holt woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. His side throbbed, but the fever had broken. Ada sat in a chair beside the bed, her slate on her lap. When she saw his eyes open, she wrote quickly and held it up. "You talked in your sleep." Holt's throat was dry. "What did I say?" She erased and wrote again, slower this time. "That you see me, all of me. Not what I look like, but who I am." "I meant it." Ada set down the slate and stood. She left the room without responding. Holt tried to sit up and gasped at the pain. The wound had been stitched, bandaged, properly. She'd kept him alive. 3 days later, they rode to Cheyenne. The money was counted, verified, and converted to a bank draft. Ada's hands shook as she held the paper that represented 3 months of blood and broken bones. At the telegraph office, she wrote out the message to her sister. "Money sent. Leave immediately. Address enclosed. You're safe now. Ada." The operator took the message and the payment. "Should reach Philadelphia by tomorrow evening, ma'am." Outside, the street bustled with afternoon traffic. Holt guided Ada toward the hotel, his ribs protesting every step. They'd take a room, rest, then head home in the morning. "Holt Brennan." The voice stopped him cold. He turned to see Catherine DeWitt, perfectly dressed, parasol in hand. She'd been his neighbor before the fire, had expressed interest before Emma. After the scars, she'd crossed the street to avoid him. "Catherine." Her eyes took in his appearance, then shifted to Ada. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered there. Judgment. Pity. "I heard you'd taken a mail-order bride. How desperate you must have been." Ada's hand tightened on her slate. Holt stepped closer to Catherine. "Desperate? No. Lucky." He gestured to Ada. "This is my wife. She's worked beside me for months, never complained, never quit. She's stronger than any person I've known." "How charitable of you," Catherine said, "taking in someone so unfortunate." "The only unfortunate thing," Holt said, his voice hardening, "is that I wasted time caring what people like you thought." He took Ada's hand. "She saved my life. Twice. She's brave and capable and worth 10 of anyone who judges by appearance alone." Ada pulled out her slate and wrote rapidly. She turned it to face Catherine. "Pity is for those who can't see value in others. I don't pity you. I just feel sorry for anyone who never learns that worth isn't measured in mirrors." Catherine's face flushed. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away stiffly. Holt looked at Ada. "You didn't have to do that." She wrote, "Yes, I did. For me, not for her." At the hotel, the clerk hesitated when he saw them. "We have a room available, but it only has 1 bed." "That's fine," Holt said. "We're married." The clerk handed over the key. Upstairs, the room was small but clean. Ada set down her bag and moved to the window, looking out at the street below. Holt came to stand beside her. "What I said in the fever, did it frighten you?" Ada picked up her slate. "No, it terrified me, because I feel the same way and I don't know what to do with it. We could start by being honest. I'm not good at this, at feeling things again. But you make me want to try." Ada wrote, "I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough. Not pretty enough, not normal enough, not worthy of being chosen. Then you chose to nearly die for my sister. How do I not love someone like that?" Holt took the slate from her hands and set it aside. He cupped her face, feeling her lean into his touch. "You are enough. You've always been enough. I was just too broken to see it at first." He kissed her then, gentle and careful. Ada's hands came up to grip his shoulders, pulling him closer despite his injuries. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. That night, they shared the bed as husband and wife in truth, not just contract. And in the darkness, Two people who'd been taught they weren't worthy of love proved that the world had been wrong about them all along. 3 months felt like 3 years. Every day, Ada watched the road. Every night, she wrote letters Rose would never receive in time to answer. Holt watched her watching, saw the fear that her sister wouldn't come, that something had gone wrong. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late November, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Ada dropped the basket of eggs she'd been carrying. They shattered on the ground, forgotten. She ran, her hip protesting, her breath coming in gasps. Holt followed, slower because his ribs still ached in cold weather. The wagon stopped. A girl climbed down, thin and pale, with Ada's grey eyes and dark hair. She looked around at the vast emptiness, at the mountains in the distance, at her sister running toward her. They collided hard enough to stumble. Ada's arms wrapped around Rose, holding her like she might disappear. Rose was crying, saying Ada's name over and over. Ada's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Holt stayed back, giving them space. The wagon driver tipped his hat and left. When the sisters finally separated, Rose looked at Holt with curiosity and caution. Ada wrote on her slate and showed her. "This is Holt, my husband. He saved you as much as I did." Rose approached him slowly. "Thank you. Ada's letters said you risked everything." "Your sister did the same," Holt said. "She's the brave one." Over the following weeks, Rose transformed like a flower finding sunlight. She helped with the house, learned to cook Ada's recipes, laughed at Holt's dry humor. She was gentle with the horses, patient with the cattle, curious about everything. One evening, Holt found Ada on the porch, watching Rose hang laundry. The girl was singing softly, some song from Philadelphia. "She's happy," Holt said, sitting beside his wife. Ada wrote, "She's safe. That's all I wanted." "What do you want now?" Ada looked at him, then at the ranch, then back at her slate. "This. You. A place where we all belong." Inside, Rose had prepared dinner, setting the table for 3. They ate together, Rose talking about her day, about the calf she'd helped birth, about the letters she was writing to friends back east. The house felt alive in a way it never had when Holt lived there alone. After Rose went to bed, Ada and Holt sat by the fire. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. They fit together now, comfortable in their silence. Ada pulled back and looked at him. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was trying something, he realized, trying to speak. "You don't have to," Holt said softly. She shook her head and tried again. The sound that came out was rough, broken, barely recognizable. But it was there, a single syllable that might have been his name. "Holt." It wasn't clear. It wasn't perfect. It was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I hear you. I've always heard you." Ada's hand found his scarred cheek, tracing the burns he'd once hidden from the world. In her touch, he felt acceptance. In her eyes, he saw home. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the empty plains. Inside, 3 people who society had rejected sat together in warmth and belonging. A scarred man who'd lost everything. A woman the world had taught to be invisible. A girl saved from a terrible fate. They weren't a perfect family. They were something better. They were chosen. Rose appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. "I heard something. Are you both all right?" Ada smiled and wrote on her slate. "We're more than all right. We're home." Rose joined them by the fire, settling on Ada's other side. Holt looked at the 2 sisters, at the life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. The ghosts of his past had finally stopped haunting him. In their place was something he'd thought he'd lost forever. A reason to wake up, a reason to keep going, a family. The fire crackled. Outside, the black stallion whinnied softly. Ada's hand stayed in Holt's, her sister's head resting on her shoulder. And in that moment, in that small house on the edge of nowhere, 3 broken pieces became whole. Now, if this story touched your heart, click the like button and subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful tale of courage and redemption waiting for you. These are the stories that remind us that worth isn't found in perfection, but in the courage to keep fighting for those we love.